Hello, I'm Robert Balfanz, Research Professor at the Center for the Social Organization of Schools, Johns Hopkins University, and Director of the Everyone Graduates Center. This narrative PowerPoint provides an introduction to using early warning and on-track systems to keep all students on track in middle and high schools to high school graduation and post-secondary success. It explains what these systems do and how they work. It discusses the properties of good early warning indicators and summarizes what is being learned about effective prevention and intervention strategies for attendance, behavior, and course performance, the ABCs of school success. Finally, it highlights the purpose and importance of creating school-level early warning and on-track systems and data and intervention tracking tools, and how teacher teams can use them in schools to increase student and school success. There are three big ideas here. First, to graduate high school, college, and career ready, students need to acquire a set of academic behaviors. For example, how to self-organize, regularly attend school, regulate their emotions, how to get their coursework done, and how to stay focused in class and study. They need to do this in addition to mastering the core content knowledge and developing critical academic skills. Second, there are key transition points linked for moving from one level of schooling to the next, from pre-K to elementary school, the beginning of the middle grades, typically in 6th grade, the start of high school, usually 9th grade, and the period from earning enough credits at the end of your senior year to when you start classes at a post-secondary institution. These are the times when academic behaviors are the most critical. Finally, students signal early and often if they are not developing or employing these academic behaviors. Thus, if we monitor students' signals about the extent to which they are demonstrating key academic behaviors, they provide us early warning indicators of the extent to which they are on or off track to high school graduation, college, and career ready. Once armed with this information, schools can organize themselves to intervene at the first signs that students are falling off track, thereby increasing the odds that the intervention will succeed and the student will develop the needed academic behaviors. So one of the core findings from our research and the research from the Chicago Schools Consortium and others is that students in high poverty schools who successfully navigate 6th to 10th grade on time and on track, by and large, graduate from high school. Think of this as sort of the core body strength. If you make it from 6th grade to 10th grade on time and on track, your odds of succeeding are pretty good. If you start struggling in this period, particularly in the start of 6th grade or the start of 9th grade, those students typically have very poor outcomes, often only 25% or lower graduation rates in high poverty environments. So it's a swing of almost 4 to 1 between your odds if you're on time and on track 6th to 10th grade and if you struggle early and often and fall off track. Growing out of this core finding, more advanced work with early warning systems has gotten to the point where they can be extended all the way really through the early years of college and all the way back into the elementary grades to provide a continuum of indicators and link supports to keep all students on time and on track to adult success. Another benefit of early warning indicators and link support systems is they can help schools become more efficient in their intervention strategies, in particular by providing a means to establish where the most productive and strategic points of intervention are. Is it at the individual level, the classroom level, the school level, or even the district or state level? Finally, early warning indicators can highlight which students are most in need of stronger adult relationships. This will help the school direct the resources where they'll do the most good. The key idea here is that early warning systems also provide a means for adults in the schools to work together to support students. They provide the organizing framework and data that lets adults pool their knowledge of the student and also their different abilities to interact with that student to create a much more holistic support system, rather than asking every teacher to do everything for every student, which is both impossible and in practice does not happen. Let's take a minute to consider what makes a good early warning indicator. The truth is the field of dropout prevention nearly went into eclipse because they used bad indicators. Throughout the 1990s and really before, indicators were largely demographic in nature. High poverty kids, students of different ethnicities, special ed kids, and yes, those students graduate at lower levels than other kids, but what happened is that many of those kids do graduate and many other kids that don't graduate were in those categories, and as a result, when they did studies of dropout prevention, they found very minimal effects, which got people to believe there wasn't much that could be done. The main problem people found out in the early 00s was the wrong indicators were being used. Once you used indicators that were reliable and valid, that tell you that students absent an intervention are not going to make it, once they were practically useful, that they could identify a large number of kids in need of help, and once they were parsimonious, so that each indicator added a new set of kids that wasn't picked up by the other indicators, Suddenly they became very powerful, and the ABCs were born. Although the initial wave of research from early warning systems in the OOs focused on off-track indicators and what would signal a student was on the path to dropping out, subsequent work has been shown that they can also be very effective on-track indicators. And these are essentially the positive side of the behavior. Students that come every day, students that are focused, students that get a B or better average.
Here's an example of on-track indicators at work. This is data from Boston. It shows that high school graduates in Boston who have a 95% or better attendance record, a 2.7 GPA or higher, took the sequence of courses needed for admission to the state university system, known as the Mass Core, and took an AP class, had an 80% chance of earning a BA degree. Students with none of these indicators had only 11% chance. This is a huge swing between high odds and low odds, all based on a few key indicators. Among all the indicators, getting decent grades in challenging courses were the most powerful. This is good news, as this is something all students can obtain. It puts the challenge on us to design an educational system that enables it.
We're now going to look at some more detail on what we've learned about these on and off-track indicators, and begin first with course performance. Course grades typically indicate both students' ability and student effort. They capture both how well students do on tests and major projects, but also reflect their ability to turn in and complete their assignments and pay attention and participate in class. As such, course grades have proven to be very powerful and very accurate indicators of high school graduation, college success, and even, it turns out, adult wage earnings. The shorthand here is that D's and F's are strong off-track indicators, and B's and better tell us a kid is on track to success. Two key points here. First, middle grade course failures are also predictive of dropping out from high school. In fact, the impact of a single failure is greater in middle school than in high school. Second, the timing of a failed class in the middle school also affects the chances of graduating. Students who fail classes in 6th or 7th grade only, but recover, that is, fail no 8th grade classes, graduate from high school at much higher rates than those who continue their pattern of failing courses. This indicates that efforts to prevent students who have failed one course from failing more will pay off. In an era of test-based accountability, the fact that course grades are as important to a student's odds of graduating and succeeding in college as test scores can be a challenging finding. Adults typically are not held accountable for student grades. They are held accountable for test scores, and increasingly those test scores are used to determine whether they maintain their job and if they get a raise or a promotion. However, the data is clear. To enable all students to graduate college and career ready, adult attention does need to be paid to students' grades, and students with failing grades need intervention and support to bring their grades up. All students, moreover, should be prompted to do the work necessary to get B's or better. The good news is the data also shows better grades does lead to better test scores. The second strong on and off-track indicator is attendance, the importance of being there. In general, schools do not track chronic absenteeism, that is, missing 10% or more of school, or strong regular attendance, missing 5 or fewer days. But both of these are powerful indicators. Many schools and districts are also not aware of the extent of chronic absenteeism in high-need schools, but it can be very high as 15% of students in the elementary grades, 25% of students in middle schools, and up to and over half of the students in high schools can be missing a month or more of school. When chronic absenteeism reaches these levels, whole schools, not just individual interventions, are needed. Many students who fail courses have poor attendance. As a result, poor attendance rather than lack of understanding is more likely to be the root cause of poor course performance. In particular, students who are absent are much less likely to complete their course assignments. Attendance also impacts test scores. If students need to pass exit exams to graduate, then the impact of attendance on passing these key tests will further reduce the odds that a student graduates. So the bottom line on attendance is we need to be keeping a close eye out for students that are missing 10% or more of school. And once that happens, intervene quickly to turn it around. We also want to be encouraging more and more students to miss 5 or fewer days. And finally, we have to keep our eye out on the kids that fall in between. They're not quite a danger of dropping out of school, but they're not quite on the path yet either to full success. So we also have to find out a way to make sure that students that are in between get some notice. Finally, a particular group of kids to pay the closest attention to are kids that had no prior history of chronic absenteeism and for the first time trending towards it this year. That tells us that something new has happened, that there's been a change outside of school or a change in the relationship to school, but the fact that it's new likely means it may be more easily resolvable. The final on and off track indicator we will look at is behavior. Behavior is harder to measure in a standard way from school to school than either attendance or course performance, but the accumulated evidence is clear. Students who are suspended once should be supported so they are not suspended again. Students who engage in sustained mild misbehavior, for example, are sent to the office or receive detention multiple times, are also students we need to pay attention to. They are signaling a level of disengagement with schooling or the lack of key academic behaviors, which if left unintended will greatly increase the odds they will drop out. Finally, effort in and of itself is an important behavior and something to monitor. First, often many more students engage in sustained mild misbehavior than get suspended, and the data is clear that these students will fall off track. Hence, it is important to monitor and find effective prevention and intervention strategies for sustained mild misbehavior, as well as major incidents which lead to suspensions. Second, students who are engaged in school, forth more effort, have better attendance, and get higher grades. So again, we clear off-track indicators we want to drive down, kids being suspended, kids engaging in sustained mild misbehavior. Positive indicators we want to drive up, being engaged in school. What does this look like when we put it all together? This slide shows us what happens to all of the sixth graders in the school district of Philadelphia based on what they did in the sixth grade. It shows that those students that missed 10% or more of school in the sixth grade, that had an unsatisfactory final behavior mark in one class or two or more suspensions, received an F in math or English, what their final outcomes were. And it shows a very distressing picture. You can see the line going down, 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 like the stock market crashing, until at the end, only 15 to 25% of those students got a diploma. Think about this. This told us that if you're 12 years old, and you're waving your hands like crazy, everyone else is looking the other way, and if we don't do anything, really bad outcomes happen. This slide, actually, for all its complexity, was one of our very early slides we did in the early days of sort of viral internet. And this slide was picked up from just a presentation done at a DC conference and went viral across the nation. And in many ways was the slide which inspired lots of districts and states to really consider the power of the ABCs and how early warning systems could provide a very powerful tool to pay attention to those waving hands early while it was still possible to do something. This shows the importance of course performance on the ability of middle grade students to succeed in high school. And again, how course performance is as powerful as both test scores and academic behaviors. As we said at the beginning, the initial early warning indicator research focused on what were the indicators that a student was on the path to dropping out, and absent intervention would more than likely achieve that undesired outcome. Since then, work has progressed to try to figure out what tells us that a student is on track to being college and career ready. This is, in many ways, the next frontier of this work. So we're going to do a little mind experiment here before we turn to the next slide. If you were in charge of a school district and a major philanthropist showed up your door and said, "We will give your kids a free ride to college as long as 75% of those that enroll actually graduate," what type of academic behaviors might you look for in the 9th grade to say that you were on track to achieving that outcome? Take a minute and jot down your thoughts before you turn to the next slide. What did you come up with? Well, when we ran the data in a major southern state, what we found is that the students that had a 75% chance of succeeding in the state university system in the 9th grade had the 5 tools of successful students. They came every day, they didn't get in trouble, they didn't fail classes, they had that B or better GPA, and they had mid-level test scores, not necessarily even proficient, just upper basic. And almost every student that had these also was on age for grade. So our basic finding was that you actually needed every one of these to have a 75% chance of graduating from the state university system. Drop 1, drop 2, drop 3, and your odds decline dramatically. The kicker here is we found only 25% of the 9th graders in the state had these characteristics, which not perhaps unsurprisingly translates to the fact that about a third of the kids in the state actually graduated with a 4-year degree. So this slide puts a decade's worth of work together in one place. It basically shows for the ABCs, attendance, behavior, and course performance, what the core on and off track indicators are, and really is the basis for which both districts, schools, and states can build their early warning intervention systems. Now let's imagine we're a teacher team, and our state or our district has implemented an early warning system. These next couple of slides show us the type of data that system might produce and how it might help us think about our students in more productive, effective ways. This slide highlights 3 very different students, all in need of different types of interventions. This is real data from a single 8th grade teacher's homeroom. In fact, it's the first 3 students on her roll book. The first student does well on assessments and is reading on grade level. So if we just looked at the traditional measures of test-based outcomes, we'd include this kid as a win. We would say they're reading on grade level and they're proficient in math. We might tell the 9th grade, you got a good kid heading your way. However, if we move past the assessment data and look at their ABCs, we notice a big dip in attendance and the fact that the student is getting Ds. Clearly something has happened in the past year to cause the student to begin to disengage from school. They have strong academic skills, but they're getting low grades, and suddenly they're not coming to school very often. So absent interventions, this student is likely to struggle with the transition to 9th grade, and despite those strong test scores, may well be on the path to dropping out. In fact, the Chicago Consortium found that 25% of 9th graders that fall off track look very good in the 8th grade, at least on their test scores. It's by looking at a wider range of data that we get an early indication that this student is in trouble and need of intervention now. The second student has both low test scores, grades, and significant behavior issues. In this metric, the more behavior comments a student has, the worse their behavior. The question here is what is driving what? Is the student lost in class because they are missing key skills and hence acting out? Or is the student acting out for out of school reasons and hence not paying attention in class and then falling behind? Each of these possibilities suggests very different interventions, and this is why it is important for teachers to share their information, what they know about the student, once they've looked at the data. Because if you get the diagnosis wrong, you get the intervention wrong, and you could actually make things worse and not better. For example, if you thought that this student needs a tutor because maybe they lost important skills, when in fact they actually have those skills, but for varying reasons they're just not showing them, the student may think you're telling them that you think they're dumb and actually start acting out more. The last student is really falling off a cliff. They are not coming to school. When they do come to school, they're getting in trouble, they're failing everything, and they have low test scores. Look at this amazing fact. Last year they had 48 days absent. This year it's up to 69. They've almost lost the whole school year over the last 2 years, yet they still come occasionally. They're still on roll, and when they come, they get in trouble. This is a student who needs serious professional case management right away, or in fact, they are not going to make it to high school. They are going to be among the growing number of students that we've been starting to see who are dropping out before they even get to high school. This next slide shows a second-generation early warning data system. In this slide, we begin with our ABCs, but then we combine that with some student resiliency data based on student surveys. What we're going to see is this student survey data on resiliency lets us have early indicators even before some of the established ABC indicators start to signal the students in trouble. So we have 2 students here. The first one is a female. This data is from about 8 weeks into the school year. What we notice here is that she's only come to school 74% of the time in the first 2 months. But when she's in school, she doesn't get in trouble. She's doing okay in her classes. She has B's and C's. So the student may or may not be on our radar at this point. We may think, let's see what happens. Maybe just getting adjusted to school. Seems to be doing okay. But when we look at this resiliency data, it tells us a different story. It tells us that this student doesn't feel well, that this student's under stress, and they don't have a sense of connection. Clearly something is wrong, likely out of school, and this student is barely hanging on. It's clear that she's not going to recover, that missing school is going to continue, and the grades will probably start to plummet. And really the resiliency data is telling us we need to do something now and figure out what's going on. Now look at the next one. It's a male, beginning of the school year, comes every day, but has already been suspended once. So possibly he's well on the way to having a bad reputation. Can you believe it? This kid just got here and already we had to send him home? This is one that's going to really cause us trouble. And he's already failed a science class. But here the resiliency data tells us a different story. It tells us the student is highly motivated, they feel well, they're not stressed, they feel connected, and they're confident. This is probably a happy-go-lucky kid that just wised off to the wrong person at the wrong time, maybe a science teacher. But what we do notice in resiliency data is that he doesn't yet have a strong connection or understanding that what he does in school now affects his future life chances. So this is probably the case where an easy redirect will make a big difference. Someone just needs to sit down and tell him, look, what you do now matters. How you do in 6th grade affects your future course, and you just got to learn how to control your mouth a little bit, and you'll be okay. So here was the case that by adding the resiliency data, we get a much more nuanced understanding of what's going on, and some insights that the teacher team will pick up over time, but this helps fast forward it and lets us get those interventions quicker to the point and therefore more effective. What do we do with all this data? That's what we're going to look at now. It's really imperative that teachers have at their fingertips actionable data of the type we've seen in the last few slides. But actionable data alone doesn't really change anything unless we have a system built in that can act upon it in a meaningful and effective way. So this brings us to the idea of creating effective student support systems. And we're going to see some of those things those systems have now. In order to function well and at the scale needed, multi-tiered student support systems need to have ready access to the early warning indicator data at the classroom level. Second, there needs to be a set time when adults can review the data, and those adults who know the students can pool knowledge and determine who currently might be best positioned to talk with and support the student. In other words, who can be the student's champion. Finally, the system needs to be able to intervene both at the individual student level in a very customized way, but also intervene more broadly at the classroom, grade, and school level to really figure out what is the most strategic level of intervention. The best way to be strategic is to practice intervention discipline and not always go first to the highest intensity intervention available. Oftentimes when folks begin working with early warning systems data, their first tendency is to use this data to create highly customized, highly individualized interventions. There is a huge place for that and a lot of power. But if it's your only strategy, you're going to quickly run out of adults to be champions or ways to individually intervene with all the students in need. Those interventions should be saved for students for whom neither preventive strategies or more moderate Tier 2 strategies, nagging and nurturing in a broadest sense, are enough. And really we want to save our Tier 3 case managed things for the students for which neither the prevention nor their intermediate strategies work. By practicing this intervention discipline, we'll not only have more effective responses, but we're able to keep the adults doing it for a longer time because they won't get immediately burnt out by trying to save too many kids single-handedly. The core idea here is when we have many students in need, as will be the case in turnaround schools, we have to really build this multi-tiered student support system, which is an ecosystem, which is that each layer of support engulfs the other. But each layer of support also enables the other to be effective by not having it be overwhelmed by too many kids without the resources to deal with them. Now we're going to take a minute to look at the nitty-gritty. What does an early warning systems support team do? How do they function? There are several key ideas on this slide. First, the support list is a fluid document. Students will leave this list once their attendance, behavior, or course performance improves or stabilizes. Students will be added to the list throughout the year as they are flagged by the early warning indicator data. It's very important that this list be kept fluid. Again, there's often some tendencies to fill it up at the beginning of the year and just work with those kids, not keeping your eye on the kids that started out okay, but then something happened to. It's also important to try to move kids off the list as they get better. Second, it is important to identify student strengths and build interventions around them. It's very important that early warning systems don't fall into the trap of being a deficit-based intervention, assuming that any kid that's flagged is in trouble and has something wrong with them. What the flag tells us is this kid is facing some tough challenges and needs extra support to succeed. But from what we learned about our prior work on motivation and understanding of stress and scarcity, the best antidote for this is a strong adult relationship, and strong adult relationships are best built when they build upon and expand student strengths. So it's really important to say our goal is to understand what the student's strengths are and use those to help them meet their challenges with adult support. This slide summarizes some of the points we've made before and adds one new one. It's really important to track the outcomes of the interventions on a regular basis and analyze what's working for who, when, and how. All too often what happens in schools is that a bunch of different things are tried at a bunch of different levels, and the evaluation at the end of the year is simple. Did test scores go up or not? If test scores went up, everything worked and basks in the glory of that improvement. If test scores went down, it's felt that nothing works and we have to change everything. The truth is that when scores go up, probably 6 out of 10 things worked, and when they didn't, maybe only 4 out of 10 things worked. To make progress and really improve how we can intervene with kids, it's really important to closely track what was tried with whom and when did it work. Over time, this lets us develop a local knowledge, what works for our kids and our situation, when and how. The other thing this helps push against is the human tendency to have a default strategy. To always say when kids are absent, what we do is this, without ever stepping back to analyze, does this work for all kids in all situations? Or is it just the first thing we think of and think we should try first? So that's why both recording interventions and then analyzing them is actually essential to making this system work. Advanced early warning system work goes in 2 directions. One direction seeks to gain deeper understanding into the root cause of student behavior. The other direction is to look beyond the individual student to see patterns emerge from groups of students that can help direct interventions to more strategic levels, the classroom, the grade, the school, or even the district. One classic example here is if you suddenly see a bunch of students spiking and failing math, or science, or English. The first tendency might be to say, we've got to find a bunch of math tutors, or English tutors, or science tutors. The truth being, it's hard to find a lot of good tutors quickly. A much more effective strategy, though, might be to notice the data more closely and see that most of the failures are coming from one teacher, and understanding that a much more effective intervention would be to send a coach to work with and observe that teacher and figure out what's going on and how that teacher can be assisted to enable more of her students not to fail, or his students not to fail. Another thing that can be learned by looking at the data and for looking at patterns at a higher level is that sometimes this is where our demographic data comes back in and can actually be used to help us craft more systematic interventions. So, for example, we find that most of the students failing in English are recent immigrant ELL students. That tells us we need a stronger entry program for recent immigrant ELL students. Or, for example, if we find that most of the students getting in trouble in the middle grades are 2 years over age, this is probably a strong indicator that we need to find a way for those students to be accelerated and rejoin their classmates, because there's really no one angrier than a 16-year-old 8th grader. Here are some of the questions that can be used to gain a deeper understanding of the root cause of students with course failure. The final thing early warning system teams, and really the school as a whole does when they have early warning systems, is they figure out what type of adult response is needed given the level of need. If a school has more than 100 students with off-track indicators, it's usually the case that more adults need to be recruited to help, to form those relationships, to be the champions, to be the person power needed, so students with need can be met with an appropriate adult response. In fact, as we said before, perhaps one of the core defining definitions of a school in turnaround is a school where there are too many kids with needs and not enough adults to help them. So one of the things schools have to think about is where they can find this second shift adults who can come in to help them call students who are absent, check to see if they have completed their classwork, provide assistance if needed to get that work done, provide mentoring and encouragement and role modeling, and even basic behavior, teach them basic self-management, self-regulation, self-advocacy skills. A couple places to look. The United Way can be a good first stop, as they have recently reorganized themselves to focus on dropout prevention as one of their key outcomes. It's also beneficial to see if there are any National Service AmeriCorps programs in your community or school district. These can often put teams of young adults in the building, and each of those teams can shadow a subset of students. Finally, you can think about your local university or colleges, because students can now receive work-study funding for community service. In this presentation, we examined how early warning systems are a powerful evidence-based tool for interacting with real-time data that supports school staff in meeting the day-to-day needs of their students. Moreover, we saw how this enables teacher teams to really take their ability to pool their assets and their knowledge of kids to a higher level and get data that tells them these are the students we need to do something now or we're not going to have a good result.